let me say a little more about this terminological dispute. This might seem like a fussy and useless thing, a silly ivory tower scholar disputing about words. It's really not. Mr. Rodriguez calls his position Arian, and I said I don't know why anybody would want that name, and I would classify his theology as a type of subordinationist Unitarianism. In his reply, he sort of takes offense. He says that, I just want to call things Unitarian because that makes Unitarians seem better. I want my view to be on top, so I want things to have the same name as my view. Nope, that's just not what's going on here. The reason that I apply the name Unitarian to people like Origen or Tertullian is because I'm using the term descriptively. I'm trying to classify positions. I want there to be a place in the scheme for every position and only one place. A place for everything and everything in its place. That's how you classify. So when talking about Trinitarian views, I sort them into one-self views, three-self views, and Mysterian views. If you look at my Trinity entry in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, when I look at Christian theologies generally, I sort them into Trinitarian and Unitarian. Trinitarian theologies are ones where the one God is tripersonal in some sense. And Unitarian Christian theology is one on which the one true God, the one God, the God of Israel, is one person, namely the Father. So I'm using the term Unitarian descriptively. It's not what Origen would have called himself or Tertullian would have called himself. It's a term from a later time, but I'm using it in the way that, for instance, Christian apologists use it when they call Jewish or Islamic theology Unitarian. All they mean is that the one God is a great self. He's not in any sense three selves, as in Trinity theories. So that's why I use the term Unitarian. Now, what's my objection to Arian? Well, you've heard of Rush Limbaugh, the famous AM talk radio host, famous right-wing guy, and he's very funny, and he likes to mock his political opponents and give them names, and one of the names that he came up with a long time ago in the 90s was he calls radical feminist theorists and other politicians, he calls them feminazis, and he's calling them fanatics and kind of like fascists. Now, if you're doing serious work and you're trying to classify different kinds of feminists, you're not going to use this, deliberate insult, this polemical term, feminazi. You're not going to say, well, here, out of all the feminists, you've got the feminazis, the feminist commies, or I don't know what the other categories would be. Really, I don't know how you would characterize different kinds of feminists today. I've seen different people offer some different classifications, but I don't know which are really well-founded. Anyway, the term feminazi is just not suitable for scholarly classifications. It's a polemical term. It's an insult. So is the term Arian. The term Arian is not descriptive. The people that are called Arians in Catholic mainstream Christianity in the mid-300s, they weren't really disciples of Arius, most of them. He wasn't their rallying point. He wasn't the founder of their movement. This type of theology had deep roots, particularly in Origen and some other 2nd and 3rd century Catholic authors. Why were they called Arians then by history? They were called Arians because in the year 325 at the Council of Nicaea, this presbyter Arius was officially condemned. He lost that political battle and he was exiled. Now, of course, later he was unexiled and vindicated by other councils and then condemned again. But anyway, in the heat of the battle, Athanasius, who was a real slasher, a real street fighter in this whole long dispute, he decided to paste the label Arian on his opponents who did not like the statement from the Council of Nicaea with its new language that Father and Son are homoousios. So Arian is a label like feminazi. It's not descriptive. The whole point of it was to tar this whole various different groups of theologians with the name of a condemned man. That was the whole point of it. It was an insult pretending to be a classification. So that's why I think the term just needs to die. When I'm talking about 4th century Catholic theologians, I never use the term Arian unless I put it in quotes, the so-called Arians, Because again, Arian doesn't correctly describe their motivations or their tradition in theology. And really, there's different theories there, and lumping them all together under that term is really not very helpful. Now, I understand that in later times, particularly in the 18th century, there were some Christians who I would call Unitarians who sort of reappropriated the label Arian. They didn't take it as a bad term or as being by definition heretical, which is the way it's traditionally used. They tried to use it, hey, we like this term. We are Arians and our theology is better. Yeah, but I think it's better to go with a descriptive label rather than a polemical label that's misleading. Because again, this theology isn't really based on the theology of Arius. So why are we calling them Arians? This is also why I don't call other Unitarians Socinians. There were Socinians in the world. They were followers of this interesting man, Socinus, and he had his own tradition of interpreting the New Testament. There were some idiosyncratic elements to that. There have been Socinians in the world, but most Unitarians who think that Jesus was a man who did not have a divine nature and did not exist before his miraculous conception, most of those Unitarians differ significantly from historical Socinians. And again, most of them did not come to their views by reading Socinus, by becoming disciples of Socinus. Socinus is not much read anymore. So, I mean, you can call your theology what you want, but as a scholar, I want to use terms that don't promulgate confusions. And I think that the term Arian does.